big discussions that's being had is, why is this all happening? Why are there all these injuries in the NFL? And I won't take too much of the time here, but certainly that idea that I think no preseason games, and also the fact that the actual training camps were probably a little different in terms of the composition of padded practices and contact practices. Just again, a much more gradual approach has resulted in this. And then we have the turf versus grass debate again. And I think there's the last I read, there were 13 turf fields in the NFL versus grass. And then even the grass is complicated, the types of grass, and there's hybrids and all that. So people are looking for answers right now. And I know I spoke to Rob earlier in the week about this, and I don't think we've ever seen 7 ACL injuries in one day. So that was a new thing. But off the top, like it just in general conversations you have with people, and people asking you probably like, hey, Rob, why are there all these injuries in week 2? Why week 2? Why is this happening? Is it just an anomaly, or is there something going on?
I don't know. I mean, I could speculate. If you look to science, quote unquote, right? We spoke about this. There's a team position for the Jets by the name of Elliot Hirschman, and a real nice guy, real good orthopedic surgeon. And he published a study 2010, 2012, something like that. And he looked at turf versus grass, and 67% more ACL injuries happened on turf than on natural grass in that publication, and 31% higher incidence of ankle sprains, everted ankle sprains, right? Turf versus natural grass. And then 6-7 years later, he was an author. He wasn't the lead author on another study, and it showed that when you compared turf, and I couldn't tell you the turf fields, to be honest with you. It's been a while since I've read these things, but if you looked at turf versus natural grass in that follow-up publication, non-contact lower extremity injuries, and the injuries were more frequent, I guess, if you got closer to the ground, meaning foot ankle. 16% increase in per play in the NFL, turf versus grass. So that phenomenon has always been there, right? Injuries due to turf. Now, because of what happened last weekend, I'm assuming that's the main point of why it's all been raised again. Then you compound this with, no off-season training, or not as an effective or traditional off-season training. CBA in the NFL, what happened in college football, same thing. COVID off-season training, and then, preseason, no preseason. I know Coach Parcells was very big on preseason for 2 reasons. One, it got you into the habit of winning, right? He wanted to win his preseason games, just that type of culture. And 2, it made you battle ready. It put the armor on you. You battle tested, as Kaz said before, essentially BYU, they restricted hitting, and worst BYU team he's seen. So the turf issue has always been there. It's just been recently raised. That's the only scientific evidence, for lack of a better term, I could give you with regards to definitive numbers. We speculate with regards to the off season, and we speculate with regards to no preseason.
Yeah, that was just a correction. That was the Navy got routed by BYU in that game. So it was Navy, yeah. Yeah, they do things different out in Utah, I guess. But one of the things I was going to comment on as well, and ask, and I don't know if Eric has kept track of this, but what has been the experience on the college side? Obviously, college is a little more fragmented, and there's not as many games and all that. But has anybody seen a spike or an increase in injuries on the college side, Eric, so far?
Excuse me. I don't think we have. Right now we've had 1 ACL injury since we came back for our practices. Roughly 5 weeks ago, which is better than usual. We get about that many, or maybe a couple more during camp, especially with our younger guys that are more fatigue coming out of basic training. I felt our coach was very smart about how we practice, and we've gone pretty hard 2 or 3 days a week, but the other 1 or 2 of the other days are actually a walkthrough, and the other days no helmet. They still move pretty fast, but no helmet, no contact day. And it alternates sometimes between wearing cleats and flats. So that kind of tells you how fast they're going to go those days. We're a little worried when we came back, much like we talked about probably back in April or May. How are these kids going to train? How would they come back for fall camp? We had a pretty good uptake early of hamstring injuries and groin, hip flexor, adductor injuries, but they tapered off pretty quick. We were scared for a minute, and then we got back in the season and we did well. And I think the head football coach communicating with our strength coach Matt McGettigan, and they've really been smart about how they're moving the guys along, and we don't feel overwhelmed now. Partially, we may not feel overwhelmed either because we're only allowing 15 people in the athletic training room at a time. But we don't often hit that number. I think that one of the oddest things is, we only opened the cold tubs, I think 2 weeks ago, maybe 3 weeks ago. We just felt comfortable at that time. We could give them more opportunity to be around each other. So our recovery methods have really decreased, which is disappointing to me because I thought we were getting pretty good at the recovery, and we know that our athletes are always going to be overloaded. And we just haven't had a good chance to work on recovery regen. We started doing a little bit more now that we're getting close to game time, and some of our vets that like to do stuff like that, we did a little bit more of that. Sidebar, one of the, I think, interesting things we do is a four extremity BFR recovery session on the elliptical, kind of adapted from what that Vasper machine is with the BFR and cold compression, and it's a seated push-pull machine. And one of our former athletes sent us all the protocol, took screenshots of it as he was working on it. And it's usually a 20-minute program. We've had guys, offensive linemen, say, I've never felt this good coming out of camp, and I've never felt this good going through the season. By his daily routine, 4 or 5 times a week was 20 minutes of BFR on the elliptical. So just a little anecdote on the side there.
Yeah, I had a call yesterday with a Pac-12 school, and they were commenting some of the same things, Eric, in terms of like soft tissue injuries. So strains and things are much higher now, and it almost sounds like not everybody's there and people are still coming back. So there's this fragmentation within the program as well of uniformity of training and all that. Has anybody else seen that as well as they're coming back? Fred, what are you seeing out there?
We've taken a little different route. When we came back, when we started having our guys back, this goes back to, I think, our last conversation in a few weeks ago. But in June, July, we were going to have our guys back, and we're training outside, we're running, we're doing all that. So they're getting acclimated in that way. We started doing these run-throughs, and we've been doing them the last couple of weeks now before we get in. Now that we're having a preseason camp, so to speak, and getting into a season, we're doing these run-throughs where it was half the team was on the field and half the team would be training with us, lifting, anything like that. When we're able to move into the weight room and actually train in a weight room, that time that we had half the team on the field, half the team was now with us doing stretching and mobility. So we now took that hour that was on the opposite side of them running around and moving and all that. Either you had your B group with us stretching and getting, doing the mobility, doing soft tissue work, or they're out on the field practicing, learning, and all that. We sold that to the coaches of, with the training, and then either with them on the field, as you have more time, you have half of the team, half of your position groups, you're able to teach, train, get your system worked out, because we didn't have spring ball. And we were able to do 2 weeks of that in July leading into camp. And then we've been able to do that 2 weeks leading into what we thought was going to be a fall ball. So we've had maybe one hamstring issue going in, but the most, other than that, it's been contact stuff, wrist, shoulder, the normal football things you're going to see. So we're happy where we're at physically in terms of soft tissue health wise, because we're able to take care of that. And we're going to continue something like that, opposite meetings and just working around the amount of time we're going to have. 4 hours in a day, 20 hours in a week, we're going to work around that. Our biggest concern has been being able to build strength and get them, physically strength wise where we want them. That's our big concern going into a camp or season going forward.
How has the progression been in terms of the contact, Fred? I know, we talk about preseason games and getting used to the contact. I've seen some cases where people are hitting each other but not taking people to the ground. Those types of things. And then a lot of the injuries that I've seen, at least to linemen, are people blocking as people being engaged. Like if you look at the Bosa injury, he was locked up and engaged, took a step, knee collapsed, and I saw that even with the game on Thursday. What's your insight into the progressions that have to be done with those types of things?
I think the guys have been playing the sport so long, so they know, okay, this is my hand placement, the timing, what do I do from here? Getting back into all that. The guy said, like, I haven't hit anybody in a long time. So just having that, I'm collisioning somebody, I'm punching somebody, like I was saying before, wrists and stuff like that are getting sore because they haven't done that so long. Even like having spring or us loading a heavy barbell on them, or that's what is, like, I feel been missing. So that's where that's coming from. We've gotten to the point where have been doing the run throughs. So there's been no contact when we didn't have helmets. We were able to start wearing helmets and then the spider pads, similar to what the NFL has been using and all that. That's kind of helped progress that in to where at least now, okay, we can do a little bit of small contact, no one going to the ground. It's mostly just tag off on the hip. So that's the next step. The step after that will be adding the shoulder pads and doing the acclimatization somewhat of what the NCAA has always gotten us to do with the 5-day acclimatization going into a camp. So we're always making sure that there's some kind of, okay, we get this on and this is what happens. Then once we get that done, then we move to, hey, we're going to scrimmage and it's thud only. Okay, we're going to go into practice. Okay, now we'll have a small live period and then go into a scrimmage where it's a little more live. It's having that progression each time is what needs to happen. But that's what's been going on with us. With the NFL stuff, I mean, we're keeping track of that too. And we, in a way, without, hopefully my head coach doesn't watch this, but it's using it as a scare tactic for them. Like, listen, in the NFL, there's been, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, over 20 ACLs, 8+ Achilles, and we look at that, we watch it, and we're watching how it's happening. I mean, you have the inside ankle bone falling flat, the knee falls in, and that's where all these, Achilles and knee soft tissue injuries are happening. Okay, we see that, we know that. Why is it happening? Because there's no way it just happens that one time. It's never happened before, and happens at one time, and that's where it happens. Okay, well, we need to look at, are their tendons too tight? I was talking with Mike Gillison a couple days ago, and that's where a big part of it, because everyone wants to do these, great plyo, single leg plyo stuff, but they don't want to work on the soft tissue strengthening and getting the muscles strong and taking the time to build that strong base of taking time doing good strength work, but they want to get right to the ballistic stuff, to the power stuff, to the speed stuff and all that, but they don't want to take the time and build a base. Like Coach had talked about in his book, The System, like you have to build a strong base, along with the rest of the guys that talked about that. But that's where we feel we need to have that time. Sorry to go on the soapbox, but that's the time I think we need to have. And that's something I think that the NFL has been lacking a little bit, because they walked into, I can correct me if I'm wrong, 8 days with the strength coach, and then it was in a ramp up, and then it was into contact, and then it was first game. It was less than a month, if I'm not mistaken, of real time. So that's where I think that could be done better in certain situations.
Yeah, and I'm going to bounce it back to Rob and people and anybody who wants to jump in on this, but it seems like people are looking for one thing that's the problem, like the turf. the strength coach, or the shoes, but obviously it's multifactorial, Rob, and the solution has to be multifactorial in terms of like how we deal with this, and we can get into like the field situation. And even when you look at the fields, grass, turf, there's so much variability within each field, each location, depending on weather and how they uh, maintain it. So what would you say is the approach moving forward without focusing on just one thing?
If we had all the answers, this wouldn't be happening, right? And I have a question for Fred at the end of my comment, but so as I said, we've always known there's been disparity between turf and natural grass, right? But I think it's more cost effective to have turf, right, versus natural grass, and that's what I've been told. I don't know if that's true or not. And you're always going to have the shoe surface interface, right? This coefficient of friction, so the grip strength of the turf on the shoe, and the foot not being able to give way. And so now it's not only the turf, but you have to select the right kind of shoe. Don't ask me, because I don't know what's the right type of shoe for the different types of turfs. And then we go into, you and I both know of a strength coach that was relieved of his duties because of a team with a high injury rate, right? And they brought in a new strength coach, and that same team exceeded the injury rate of the previous head strength coach the next year with the new strength coach. So the program's bad? Probably not. I mean, some teams do very well once a year. Look at the NFL last year. Since we're speaking about the NFL, I was shocked, happy, but shocked at the reduced number of ACLs last year compared to years past. Why? Like, what happened? And I don't know if anybody has a reason for that, but the numbers were down last year with regards to ACLs significantly. And now all of a sudden they're back on track, and probably at a faster pace. So you have turf, you have shoes, you have the COVID, you had what happened in the off-season training, but that was kind of always there with the NFL, with the CBA. It's even less now, but I still don't think it's enough training time under the CBA. You had no preseason. And not even that you have to take people to the ground. I think you got to at least play thumb when you try to tackle somebody in arm wrap. So there's just so many factors that, who knows. But one consistency that's always been there has been the turf, right? The increased injuries on turf, whether it's the foot grip strength, whether people say the game is faster, so collisions are harder, all those things. But I have a question for Fred. So Fred, the point you made with your hands and shoulder injuries with your team, and I acknowledge what you're saying with regards to you want to get your team back to the strength levels that you guys desire them to be at, or where you think you need them to be at. But I'm going to assume, and you know what they say about assume, but with everybody dealing with COVID, even if strength or physical quality levels for your team is less, I'm going to think that happened. I'm going to make that assumption that happened to every other team in your conference. So you may not be at a physical quality deficit that you think you are to your opponent, versus the deficit you want your people to be at. And so my question to you is, do you think these injuries are occurring because of lack of training, of lack of physical qualities, because no one was really able to train? Or do you think these injuries are occurring, if you had a gun to your head, because lack of practice, lack of the timing? Even though people know where to put their hands, they haven't had the reps to put their hands properly in place. You know what I'm saying? Absolutely. If you were to pick one or the other, what would you think?
Well, I do think is it wrong of me to think both? Because we
Absolutely
lost out
not. I just wanted your perspective on it.
Yeah, I think it's a little bit of both, because we had lost the training time that we would have with the spring ball. So we finished we got our whole winter, and we got one spring ball practice in, and then we went our separate ways for however many months, 3 months, whatever it was. And so we missed out on 14 more practices of getting that timing, that impact, that pounding on the shoulders and the wrists and all that that we normally have. I'm talking linemen and linebackers of having that. And I'm not saying it's a rash of them. It was a handful, 5 or 6 of them that were just, hey, let's tape it up a little more. We'll be okay. But missing out on those times and missing out on those number of contacts and missing out on that strength building, it makes us have to go and, hey, let's redraw how we normally would do this and build grip strength and build, that strength of the shoulders without having a rack or weight room, because we were training outside for at least 2 months, if not more, with all of our athletes. So I would say it's a little bit of both, but leaning more towards the side of not having the normal practice time, training time of the hitting and the pounding that we normally would have.
Well, it's really interesting because that is so critical, that the factor of the contact and then the technique around the contact and the progression. But Omar, we were worried about the NBA, like, oh, they're coming back, in the NHL, but they didn't seem to have the same sort of injury problem. Is it just because of the nature of contact versus just regular athletic movement and play, in your opinion?
Well, with hoop, they can always find a place that they can increase their cardiovascular conditioning, right? Like even like at D1s and D2s, like guys are getting in gyms and finding places to play. And so that kind of helps with some of that. Whereas like with football, like it's just such a brutal and, contact sport that you need those reps to kind of help you. Whereas at the NBA, you're getting reps because you're playing against other people and you're finding ways. And I guess the NBA's done a pretty good job of I don't know necessarily, because I follow the guy who's with the Phoenix Suns, and the stuff that he was doing with the guys in the bubble was minimal. It wasn't to do much, just to keep them as healthy as possible. But with hoop, I just think it's different because, and I don't know hockey very well, to be honest with you, so I don't want to speak on that behalf, but I know with basketball, guys have been getting in gyms and playing, and I think that helps a little bit. And so that return to play becomes a little bit different for them.
Yeah, because I mean, we haven't seen at least from the media perspective of like, hey, this season in NHL and NBA is severely impacted by injury. But now we're hearing that in the NFL, like this could definitely affect outcomes. I was asked about like, well, is this going to happen in like track and field too? And so I don't think so, just for that reason. But certainly you're still going to have like the little strains and things, wouldn't you say, Ryan, if you're bringing people back and they've been off for a while?
Well, I think that the biggest thing is that nothing can simulate the level of competition. So even though everybody might be at the same deficit, it's a myriad of factors. I don't ever buy the turf as being the thing. I mean, these guys play college football on a whole bunch of different surfaces all the time. Just like you said, you got NBA guys playing on a hard wooden surface in a bubble, in a strange gym, in a strange location. I don't buy that. I think that the reality is that the biggest mistake we made with that collective bargaining agreement is not forcing these guys to create a base of fitness. And I know that there are people that might listen to this talk later and go, well, we need to minimize things and overclock, and everybody just needs to be running really, really fast, really, really short. But the reality is that the connective tissues and things like that don't adapt at the same rate. Your overall cardio fitness, you start to make some mistakes, when you're out of shape. And the thing that I don't think anybody respects is that it's one thing to really own a practice and be the most fit guy and run around like crazy, but that psychological component of the extra stress of competition fatigues people so much faster that you really don't know what you have from even a fitness perspective until they're put up with that adrenaline pump against the other type of competition. Like today I had a cross country meet and I thought, hey, our girls are in decent shape, and I kind of knew, which girls were going to probably be our fastest, but there were 5 girls that were not at all where I thought they were going to be. I had 2 girls that were way, way, way up and performed really well. And I had one girl who literally got so tired and was so lost because she had just freaked herself out so much mentally. She was running in place, was not moving forward. She thought she was moving forward. So I had to literally grab her off the cross country course and run her over to the trainer. I had never seen that in my life outside of a discotheque, somebody running in place like that. I'm like, is she doing the Cabbage Patch? Like, what is that? And so I don't think people realize like the psychological component of that. And that's where I think there is value in preseason games, that people are so worried about getting hurt. We're so worried about load management. We're so worried about feeding the cats. You don't want to do any of that kind of stuff. But the reality is that stuff helps not only get you psychologically prepared, but prepared for what it feels like after a competition, for a coach to know what they've got, to limit the number of reps early and then crescendo it up and build it up to a main competition. The fact that we don't have two-a-days, that may make the athletes really like that better. Like right now, we have a bunch of kids that are saying they really like the classroom over Zoom. Well, why is that? Well, they can turn their screen off and mute and get their homework from their friends and cheat through Google on the tests. So of course they're going to like it because it's easy, but that doesn't mean that easy is going to be good later on down the line for your preparation of writing an essay into a university, or your preparation to take on, a linebacker who's been waiting for 3 months to knock your head off, and so the psychology of it and the lack of preparation, it's very, very obvious. So we're seeing a rash because we've even been more unprepared because of COVID and things that we aren't able to do to hold people accountable. And they'll be like, yeah, bro, I've been lifting all day at the gym. I got my workouts in. I'm doing all this stuff. But you and I both know that there are very, very few people who can get the boxes all checked off and be more prepared for that upcoming season away from you than with you. Like I have one girl on my team of 25 girls or whatever it is that is more prepared by herself than she would be to be with her teammates and with me and all that kind of stuff, because she's just that motivated. And the amount of time that I can give her, which is 2 hours a day, is actually less than she probably could give herself through workouts, cool downs, core, and lifting weights and all that kind of stuff. So I think, in my opinion, I know that's a lot, but I think all of those things are a problem. And I hope that because the NFL is big money, they make adjustments to deal with that. Because if I'm Saquon Barkley, I'd much rather have 2 or 3 preseason games and have two-a-days in camp and be physically prepared to handle the rigors of the sport than to go out there and, on a pretty hard tackle, blow up my leg and have to now look at another season where I'm not performing as the best running back in the league.
That's a very good point. Does anybody else have any thoughts on that psychological preparation and stress inoculation piece that Ryan talked about? I'm curious, like how do you prepare if you don't have those preseason games? Like Eric Kozlowski, what are you guys doing to make sure that they're ready for a game specific type stress environment? Because I remember somebody telling me they were doing heart rate in games for a team, and the guy who was receiving the kickoff, he was at 60, and then as soon as the kickoff was made and the ball's in the air, his heart rate shot up to 180 and he was still standing there. So how do you prepare for that if you're just in a practice environment?
I think that most coaches and teams will do a dry run of a game day, and we usually do one, and we've done 2 so far, where we actually go to the stadium and take the team down and go through the team warm up that the strength coaches lead, run into almost like a game situation. And 2 Fridays ago we did that a little bit. And last night, actually 2 Saturdays ago, but yesterday afternoon we went to the stadium, did exactly that, and then spent our whole 55-minute warm up in our uniforms, coming from the locker room, going out for our whole team warm up led by Getty, and then position warm ups, and then back in just like what a game would look like. And I think will be a little bit helpful. We're very young and inexperienced right now, but I think that's pretty good coaching when they take the time to show the kids the importance of being at the competition venue, what it's going to look like for game day and how they're going to prepare themselves mentally. And then we go into kind of a scrimmage and situation, referees and all stuff like most people would. But I think that's the best we've done. We haven't done anything real fancy other than, just that.
Yeah. I mean, I want to go back a bit too. Like we talked about fitness and fatigue and all that. And it's interesting, Rob and others, if you want to jump in, where Tim Hewitt was saying that fatigue isn't necessarily a predictor of ACL injury. and perhaps other injuries, because when you're fatigued, you probably don't exert as much force, and you probably have more knee flexion. What do you guys think of that? How big a factor is fatigue in producing injuries, especially some of these catastrophic ones?
I think it's a factor. If you look at the science, Tim is accurate. To me, it's kind of like when you wear knee braces. The offensive linemen wear knee braces. If you look at like ACLs and things like that, I don't think knee braces prevent ACL injuries. However, when a lineman takes his knee brace off and the outside bar is bent, did you say the knee? I think with fatigue, you have decreased awareness, like kinesthetic sense, and your foot placement may not be where it should be. Your hand placement may not be where it should be due to fatigue. If you don't have force output, then you have accuracy and enough force to handle deceleration and cutting abilities, where a lot of these injuries happen, right? Whatever it may be. So I think it does play a factor, though Tim's work may show it doesn't, or other works may show it doesn't. And the other thing I want to just touch on a point Ryan made, and we can agree to disagree. I certainly respect Brian, but turf does have a role in these injuries. And if you look at Hirschman's first study, there was no COVID, there was preseason games. It was a 10-year study, and in the NFL, people played on turf and they played on natural grass throughout the season. And over those 10 years, the incidence of ACL injuries was 67% higher over 10 years with preseason and no COVID on turf. And the reason is that you have this cleat that is an intersurface on this turf, which gives you a big grip. It's a coefficient of friction that is much higher than a sneaker on a wood floor or a baseball cleat on dirt. So,
Well, do you think it would make a bigger impact at a pro level, where people might be bigger, faster, stronger, than maybe at an amateur level, or I guess a lower level? Does it get magnified?
Don't know. I can only tell you what happened over those reported over the 10 years by 32 NFL teams with no COVID, with preseason hitting, and the same teams playing on both grass and turf during the same season over a 10-year period. You're talking about a 2/3 increase of injury and a 1/3 increase in ankle injury. So it's not a snapshot of a week, and it's not without preseason. So how do you explain that? So the biggest difference in football is this turf with this cleat versus other sports. That's the problem.
So let me ask the dumb question before we move on then, because I'm good at asking the dumb questions. With the field turf, or the new turf, where it's not the Astrodome, thin layer of carpet, or Philadelphia's field of hell, that's just literally like the stuff you have for a doormat out in front of your house. Like, what has that improved or made it worse? Because what I saw and again, this is totally anecdotal, but what I saw when we went with that field turf, where you had the broken down rubber and the sand and the simulated grass, that we weren't getting the knee injuries as much, but we were getting a buttload of ankle injuries. That seemed to be the big issue. So I don't disagree with you. And I'll let you answer that question. All I was going to say is, like, I don't think that this particular spike in ACLs is necessarily because of turf, because I know that one field, they just put in a new field and a whole bunch of people got hurt. So that could go against my argument. I guess I was just saying maybe lack of preparation and people playing on that turf could be an issue. But anyway,
Brian, I agree with you. All I'm saying is, if I have to present something as factual, like to an owner or a GM, whatever. So his first study was like from 2000 to 2009, something like that. So yes, it's early turf. His second study, which he wasn't the lead author, but he was like number 2 and number 3, was like from 2012 to 2016. So that's pretty recent, within 5. So that's like a 5-year period. And from all I can remember from it, I can't give you percentages like I did on the first one, because the first one, the percentages are so high, is that for every play on turf, there was a 16% higher incident of lower extremity injury. And I think it was higher at foot ankle than it was at knee. But my point was 16% on turf versus grass. And so again, it's just this shoe surface interface. But I agree. All I'm saying is this, is that I agree 100% with you. You need to be battle tested, and these guys, they aren't prepared physically. Like years ago, when I used to work with Coach Parker, and there was no CBA, there was no social media, and free agency wasn't what it is now, right? So this was from 86 to 91, okay? Those 6-7 years. We had anywhere from 20 to 22 weeks, depending on the year, in our off-season training, right? Compared to what it is now. And then, the social media, and I got my guy, and you got your guy, and then every other year I'm playing for a different team. It wasn't anything like that. So do I agree with you? Yes, but can I give you a fact that yes, because of CBA, because like I said, we all assume and we have this presumption, and I agree with it wholeheartedly, but then how do I explain decreased injuries last year with the CBA, right? I mean, that throws my argument out the window. So, I'm just trying to present what people feel is factual. But I agree with you. Preseason, conditioning, the whole thing. I agree with you. It all plays a role. How do we quantify it?
Yeah, well, with the turf issue, like I said, there's 13 teams who have a home field with turf versus the other 19 with grass. Now, I know I had visited a facility a couple of years ago, and I was asking them, well, what do you guys practice on? Well, the players hate the turf on the indoor facility, so we try to stay outside on the grass as long as possible. And this was a team that has a home turf in their stadium, right? So is the variability between like practicing all the time on grass because you want to protect the players, and then they have to play on turf, they're not conditioned for that. So Eric, in your situation, do you guys have grass that you practice on and then turf that you play on, or are you always on turf? Because I think that could make a difference as well in terms of that variability and that specific preparation that we're talking about, that maybe people aren't ready for turf because they're not on it that much. What do you think?
We predominantly practice on grass. I think grass is better on the body, and even the way that I woke up today from just standing, our stadium turf is a year old, and I am much more stiff after standing on the sideline of a turf at the stadium than I am on the natural grass every day at practice. So I'm 53 years old, so I guess I feel a little bit more than the young guys, but I do think the turf is still harder on the body, even if it's the brand new turf. Our indoor is also our the field turf, whatever it's called. And we spend most of our spring practices in there. I can't honestly tell you if we get more injuries on the turf or on the grass. We haven't kept track of that, but we do try to practice more often on the grass for that reason. And coach does a pretty good job of monitoring everything, because he's a head coach. The sprinkler systems and how much water the field's getting to make sure it's not too wet and too slick. And but we try to stay on the grass much as we can.
Is that the same for you guys, Fred? Like in terms of like what surface you practice on versus what you play on?
We're pretty much all turf. I believe, and someone can fact check me, but I'm fairly sure our entire conference, the MAC, is all turf. I think the last grass game we played was probably at a Big Ten school a couple years, like 2 years ago in 2018. We practiced on grass, and honestly, it was, I don't know if it was just, bad omens or whatever, but every time we practiced on a grass field, we had an injury. Ankle, knee, something like that. It was always an injury. And now maybe, and we didn't inspect the spot where it happened. Maybe it was a bad spot. There was a dip, or there was a hole or something like that, or it was a sprinkler. Who knows? But it would seem to be every time. and we, we saw, the players got a little spooked by it. So we practice on turf, we play on turf, and our majority of our conference is turf. And it was actually skill positions that's happened to.
Yeah, I think it's not as I don't know. I'm just thinking it's not as simple as like grass versus turf. I think there's a lot of other factors going on here, and obviously the quality of the grass and the uniformity and all that. But I think if you're practicing on grass and then you got to go somewhere and play on turf, I don't think that's a great situation, or vice versa. I just think that variability is huge. Just like, I mean, I'm 51 years old, and if I go run on a different surface, I feel it. I'm like Eric. I'm like, oh my god, that was way harder. But maybe I'm just not as resilient as I used to be. But anybody else have any thoughts on that, Ryan? Oh.
I think a neat way to kind of maybe to compare this, and you just had said it as I was typing it, is like home teams that have grass that practice on grass, home teams that have turf that practice on turf. Compare those injuries,
Yeah.
and then outside of football, I'd be really interested to see like how is it in professional tennis when somebody goes from a clay court to a grass court to a hard court, and like who plays on that the most often, and like who gets injured on that stuff the most often. It'd be a really interesting study that could be done to really narrow that stuff down. But obviously 67% increase a chance of injury on turf, that's a pretty strong study, regardless of what that turf really looks like, whether it's field turf or just straight up green carpet. But I would like to see home versus home, home grass, home turf, and then see that, because it's like you really are dealing with different stuff if you're talking about that shoe getting stuck further into that stuff, because it doesn't give away naturally like grass, where your leg gets stuck and usually the mud would slide out or the grass would slide out and you're okay, versus literally it's taking you over the top of your leg and bad things are happening. I think that would be interesting to know, just to kind of help break down what's really going on with this rash of injuries.
Yeah, because there's a huge sensory component to like when you hit a surface and you turn things on versus if you slip, right? And so there's got to be a nervous system component and a muscle memory component to that. And if you're not used to it and you you get onto something softer, I noticed this with cramping. We had athletes training on turf. They went to a soggier, wetter field to go play. Guys were cramping, and of course the athletic trainers like trying to shove Gatorade, in every orifice they can. And I'm like, I don't think it's a hydration problem. I think it's a surface problem. So I think there's something to that maybe not, this hasn't been looked at. But certainly the other part of it is going to be this psychological component of the 49ers going to play on the same field where they had 2 ACLs and a whole bunch of other injuries this weekend against the Giants. I'm going to be watching that to see how do they handle that. Is there going to be a psychological component like, hey, every time I put my foot in the ground, I could get hurt? And will that affect the outcome of the game? Any other comments on the surface piece?
Is there anybody, I don't know anything about football cleats, but has there been any studies done that looks at, are all football cleat brands the same length of cleat, or the same number of cleats on the bottom, or different position cleats have different lengths versus lineman cleats versus specialty player cleats? Has there been any research done on that with the incidence of injuries? And with that, I guess, would a brand maybe, or would there be a good thing with legislation that maybe says if these cleats are too long and people are getting too much traction, and say, hey, we've got to tone down the traction of the cleats, and say you can only have this many, or they can't be past this certain length, and maybe people, quote unquote, slip a little bit more, don't quite have the same traction, but maybe you have a decrease in injury rate because their feet aren't sticking in the ground.
Yeah, I don't know how much research has been done, but there isn't a lot of transparency around that. I know with my son, like we went through different types of cleats, and there was one brand of cleat that he wore because we kind of bought it because we were traveling. We're like, oh, he needs cleats. And he actually, he would run patterns and he would fall down. I'm like, what the hell's wrong with you? Right? Like, that must be from your mom's side. But and then he said, well, it's the shoes. They don't feel, I don't, and then we put them back in the other cleats, and he says, yeah, this is fine. So that, and we found that the stiffness of the shoe affected his coordination and his ability to cut and all that. So I would think there's a huge, contribution to the footwear, how they fit, how they feel, that maybe people aren't looking at. And there's huge variability. Like the one brand of cleats that he did have more of a, it's almost like a diamond shaped cleat, or it's the way it's tapered and all that. And then we went back to the rounder conventional cleat, and he feels better in that. He feels like it doesn't grab as much, and he can have more agility around that. So I don't know if, like, I don't know what you guys do, Eric, like in terms of looking at what shoes your guys wear, if you have a choice.
Yeah, I can comment a little bit. We don't have much of a choice because we're a Nike school. We've got to wear all Nike now. The one thing we do know is that the kids always want to wear different shoes. So we got linebackers that want to wear the speed shoes that are super light and thin. But the NFL has done, last few years, has done some studies on what we're talking about here with the different cleat lengths. And I can't speak to any specifics, but cleat length compared to turf and how it breaks away, and recommending what shoes are. They only had a bunch of Liz Frank injuries there for a minute. And then they, depending on how much the shoe bends at the sole, they feel that prevents some of the Liz Frank injuries. And, one of our counterparts that we play every year, they're an Under Armour school, and they one year they had, I think, 8 Liz Frank injuries because the sole of their shoe was just so soft, it wasn't protecting them at all. But the NFL hired a guy from the National Traffic Safety Bureau, this crash test dummy guy, and he's been coming in and evaluating their helmets. So they've got a rating system of all the football helmets, and they'll say, they'll green light helmets and rank them 1 to 10, and then they'll red light helmets that they don't allow their athletes to wear. And if you remember, I think that was the receiver last year who was upset they weren't going to let him wear his helmet, Antonio Brown, because it wasn't approved by the league at that time. And they're doing similar with shoes.
Yeah, I heard from somebody that worked at a shoe company that the NFL was telling him they wanted a stiffer cleat to prevent turf toe injuries. But again, if you go to a stiffer cleat and you're trying to protect the foot, does that drive things up the chain into the Achilles, the calf, and the knee? So I think, there's a lot of issues here that have to be looked at and researched.
And knee braces, like Rob's saying, we've been wearing, double upright knee braces, custom fit DonJoys like everybody else. And I really think they have saved our guys. Never from an ACL injury, or not. We don't believe from an ACL injury, but we've taken braces off of a kid and they've had a minor MCL injury, and the brace comes off bent, and we've evaluated the kid. He feels fine. We bend the brace back, put it on him, and he's finished the game. Now, we've had a couple kids have an ACL injury in a brace, but they should protect from at least the collateral ligament injury, maybe a hyperextension injury also. And unfortunately, our current offensive line coach wanted to make it optional for his players. So we're going to have some kids not in them this year. So that'll be a 1-year trial. If we have a bunch of, these MCLs that were nothing, the guy didn't even miss a week or barely a play. Maybe now we're missing 3-4 weeks with it.
Yeah, I would say from personally playing on like the defensive line and having buddies play on the offensive line, it's a car crash every single time. You're getting pileups. You can watch every game, and if there's a tackle made at the line of scrimmage, there's somebody rolling up on an offensive lineman, either from from up the heel to the back of the knee to the side, everything like that. Like it's a pileup in there if there's any kind of run play, and it's without fail. And I'm not saying that those things, I am absolutely not saying those things are foolproof, but from the contact injuries, that's they're lifesavers. I feel in a way. It's the twisting is where I see that a lot more of those happening. So that's the question I have for Coach is, within that study is how many of those were contact injuries? How many of those were non-contact injuries?
Most of them by far are non-contact injuries.
Okay.
Yeah, but Eric, I just have a question. What is the thought process by your offensive line coach? What is the detriment of wearing a brace for an offensive lineman? Like, why does he not want your offensive lineman?
You're asking me to think like a football coach? I don't know. I mean,
it's not like you're going to decrease his time, or you know what I'm saying? Like it doesn't make sense to me. Like why would you not have your offensive and defensive linemen wear knee braces?
You know, they always feel like it makes them faster if they're out of a brace. You know, we get an ACL kid wearing one brace or an MCL, the coaches are always asking when can we get him out of a brace.
Has there been any testing on that, research on like with a brace,
have
without
to
a
move
brace?
5 or 6 yards.
Yeah, I know.
I'm just,
and didn't ask us for our input. If they would have asked for our input, you know, I fully supported it when we went to them, and I wasn't asked for any input, or I would have said let's keep them in them.
You guys run triple option, correct?
Yeah. So
everything's going forward. They're all moving forward. There's no base blocking where there's going to be a stalemate or anything. Everything's going forward. You know, the center's going up and trying to cut a linebacker safety. Everyone's cutting and all that. There's no base blocking where there's that possibility of someone rolling into the side or you know, falling up back. It's less of a chance because everything is 2-3 yards in a cloud of dust. So it's all moving forward.
We pass 5 or 6 times a game.
Yeah. And so they're willing to risk, okay, like I want my guys moving forward fast, and like in those 5 or 6 occurrences where they have to actually pass set, it's less of a chance that they're going to get injured.
So is there a difference in injuries between those two approaches, would you say?
Between like schematically with running like Wisconsin that runs a ton and or runs more conventional zone ISO, stuff like that, versus power versus triple option?
Yeah, I'm just curious. Are there differences in the types of injuries and the number of injuries for linemen based on those approaches?
Ooh, I would defer to Eric because he's dealing with, I feel, a guy that's a little quicker, a little smaller than a Wisconsin O lineman. That I think you're going to see a lot more of those ankle, knee injuries. But I'm not in the athletic training room. I don't have that kind of patience like Eric does.
Yeah, I don't know what any of the statistics on that or how to prove it. I know we had a big decrease in collateral ligament injuries when we went in them, and we'll see how this year goes. I mean, we're there to support them any way they need us.
Yeah, well, that's an interesting. I was just curious if anybody's actually done any research on, like, if you put a knee brace on somebody, does it decrease their output, Rob? Or even if there is, the benefit outweighs the cost?
You know, I don't know. I truly don't know on that with regards to the research. I just look at it like if Eric came to me as the head coach and said, look, we started wearing these knee braces and our alignment, collateral ligament injuries decreased by us wearing this brace. To me, that outweighs the step or two of speed they're going to gain if they gain it by not wearing the brace. Because if they get hurt, they're not playing anyway. You know, I'd rather keep them safe and protected and on the field versus the 1 or 2 times in a game they may be able to get into a position where they couldn't have possibly by wearing a brace. I mean, it's not. I don't know.
You know, especially with us, where our depth is always an issue. You know, we may have a few guys on the field that can compete anywhere, but we get into our 2s, and there's a big drop off between our 1s and 2s. And oftentimes, if we get a starting offensive lineman injured, it's not the backup guy coming in. There's maybe shuffling guys around. You know, there's maybe 7 guys that are going to play, and 2, 3 of them know 2 positions. Our depth is, you know, gets us. So
Okay,
it makes more sense to protect them. Anyway.
I got a question here now. You know, Rob and I have followed a lot of these injuries, and we know that half of the ACLs occur traditionally in August in preseason scenarios. So have all we've done is we've just shifted everything, Rob, or anybody else want to jump in here? Have we just shifted it to September because there's no preseason? And also there's a lot more cannon fodder in August when you have 100 people on the roster and the injuries are getting distributed around the team as opposed to all the stars getting hurt now in September. Any thoughts on that?
Possibly, right? Just move the calendar forward. But, you know, again, who knows?
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I think someone wrote it in here, will we see a reduction or, you know, gradually through the season? I think so, as soon as more and more people get used to the intensity and the volume at which they're going at week to week.
It's kind of like football herd immunity.
Hurt
Sorry.
immunity.
Yeah, no, I think so. I think that's what's going to happen. There's kind of a bit of a natural selection going on right now where, okay, let's do this. Oh, we got our injuries. Now everybody's kind of organizing themselves and, but still, if you're a 49ers fan, it's not a great situation if you had to go through it that way.
Well, let me ask you this, Fred, and any other coaches, Eric, et cetera. So you've lost your starting lineman, starting, player. So now your next level comes in, as Eric stated before, there's a difference between his twos and his ones. Due to the lack of skill or whatever it may be that makes them a 2 or a 3, will injury rates go down, or are they more susceptible to injury because they weren't the physical specimen or the skill specimen of the starter who's been lost?
I guess it depends on who they're playing too, right? Like if that 2 and 3 has to go against a 1 on the other side.
It's just, there's just so many factors. It's just, who knows? I don't think the injury rates are going to go down. I don't.
You think it'll go right through the season?
I think it's going to go pretty much through the season.
Everybody's going to be doing the Cabbage Patch to like Ryan's girl there.
I don't know. I hope I'm wrong. But,
It was the weirdest freaking thing ever. I mean, I know I'm interrupted, but it was the weird in my whole entire life. Two decades of coaching now. That was a first. It was the strangest thing. But talking about that though, have you guys ever noticed, like after your one really hard practice, like kids are cramping up, like they're doing the cool down, they do that awful, ugly shuffle jaw cool down, and all of them start grabbing their legs and squeezing their calves and stuff like that. Like, I mean, probably some of you have put in better modalities for that, but I think like it's amazing how unprepared these people are, even though they're professionals. Anyway, I'm sorry.
Anyone else have any thoughts on what's going to happen?
Derek,
tomorrow. What's going to happen tomorrow? Tell me, Rob, what will happen tomorrow?
I knew that. I'd be king of the world. But no, just to be clear, this may level off, so to speak, just like if you look in the past, with the exception of the outlier of last year, the majority of the injuries occurred in the preseason. And then it did level off, but you had this number at the end of the season, right, in combination of preseason, regular season, and postseason. What I'm saying, this may level off. I think the injuries are going to be higher than they've been before overall when you add everything up. That's what I'm saying. It may level off, but I just think we're going to have a lot of injuries.
Yeah,
and I hope I'm wrong. I really do.
Has the Big Ten figured out when they're starting their season? Because I know the Pac-12 is like November 7th.
I believe it's October 24th.
Okay, so I'm curious to see what happens in those first few weeks for those teams, because they've kind of been held off, whether it's due to state laws and all that, and they can't fully practice. So it'll be interesting.
Yeah, they still. I mean, it's team to team. You're right. You're absolutely right. It's team to team. But a lot of them have been doing similar, like I was saying, run-throughs where they've been on the field doing at least some kind of scheme work, not going against a defense per se, still on the field and learning and getting everything they need to go play a game. It's now just the physical load that will be put on the body through a preseason camp with classes that they're going to need to get to and play football, used to playing football. I think somebody, I apologize, I don't remember who it was, but saying with the heart rate levels and all that, like I'm bringing that up to our coaches on Monday. Like, listen, we need to get that time of going through coming out of the building, coming onto the field, getting that similar deal, because again, we haven't had that since, for us, December 26th when we played in our bowl game. So I really feel like that's a big part, and the Big Ten has been doing that, if not more than us, the Mountain West, the Pac-12.
It was interesting. One of the team that I talked to yesterday, they were talking, one of the sports science guys was on, and he was saying, like, we're trying to track everything now with GPS because we know what the numbers look like in games, and now we're in our smaller groups, we're trying to reproduce things like that. Is that happening with anybody? Are they using technology to help get through this? Like Eric, what are you guys using in that regard for load management?
Wise old coaches, Matt McGettigan and our head coach and I, but we've tried to get into the wearable devices, and believe it or not, we just can't find funding to get it done. Our hockey team has gone to, they're going to wear the catapult system, which is a little more expensive because you got to get all the indoor tracking stuff. But they did it through a research grant. They're able to find that stuff. We've had a couple other teams, smaller teams, women's soccer uses them. We just try to listen to our body and or listen to the guys' bodies and we communicate on that, and that's how we've adjusted our load. And I just lost my train of thought. I'm sorry, but yeah, that's about it. Just keep an eye on them.
In this conversation, and you can speak to this, Eric, this fellow was saying he's a sports scientist doing the catapult, and he's saying he's end up being aligned better now with the medical staff, the athletic trainers, than necessarily the strength staff, because they need that relationship to understand maybe why they're getting these injuries and providing advice on the load from a medical perspective.
Yeah, I agree with that. The times we've had them and demoed them, it was a great tool that would definitely overlap with strength conditioning in the athletic training room. And if our coach likes data and numbers, so if we could give him some hard facts from what these machines were producing, it would make it easier for him to understand that where we need to back off. And it's taken us a few years, but they're starting to understand that our DBs and the wide receivers put a lot of miles on during a practice. Maybe about the other guys, and they. The one thing I think our coaches don't always understand is if I'm releasing a guy back to play and I ask them to modify their load or lower their volume, all they think about is scrimmage time. The kid might be getting 18 plays of scrimmage. Most of us understand it's the whole practice. Every time that kid's putting his foot in the ground is load on the injury or load on the body. So that's where we try to educate our coaches and even the athletes kind of keep track of themselves out on the field so they don't go backwards in a practice day without the wearable device. I think it'd be really cool to have them. We just haven't gone that direction.
So Eric, let me ask you this, or Fred, or anyone else. So what I know about GPS, you could probably fit on the head of a pin. So just take it from there, because I have not used GPS.
It's in your car. It's in your car, right?
Right. I'm the youngest guy in the room here, right? I'm the youngest guy on Zoom. But right now, I mean, traditionally, you've had all these practices. You have an off-season workout. You've had spring ball traditionally, right? And so we know in practice we want to hit these distances. We want to hit these speeds, whatever. Is that all thrown out the window now due to the environment of the pandemic and the lack of spring ball? And people are they looking for new numbers now? Or are they trying to base everything off the past, which may be, invalid based on the fact that these players aren't in the shape or prepared as they usually had? Like, how are they using the GPS now? Are they starting from zero? Or are they basing on what was done in the past?
I've heard it put in this way, where they're basically taking that GPS data from a practice and basically setting it up like a strength session by using percentage of, all right, what's the most this is for a scrimmage. The max amount of plays was 100 plays per set. They started off with 50% of that, so 50 plays, and then next they would increase to 75%, 75 plays, and then they'd go to their full 100, or it'd be a 4 staircase jump. So it's 50, go to 65, go to 75, or go to 80, then go to 100. So there's a staircase jump instead of going straight. All right, we're going to do our first scrimmage, second week camp, 100 plays, let's go. And that's where you're going to get just this mess. They did the same. They're doing the same thing with practices. And again, these are people much smarter than me that are figuring this stuff out, and it's awesome. But setting it up like a strength session, where we're not going to go out there and hit 1 RMs all in the first day. We're going to start at 50. We're going to start at 60 and progress from there. And then, so 50, 60, 70, 80. Okay, back it down. work back up, back it down, work back up in a practice. And then in our scrimmages, work up to what our maximal game rep count would be, snap count would be. If that's 100 plays, if that's 130 plays in a game, that's what we need to work up to. Because then we know when we walk into that first game, we've at least had that kind of load on us, and it's not going to be the first time.
You have the time, Fred? You know what I mean? If
Do
you
I
go
have-
50, 65, 70, do you have the time from the initiation of training to the first game to get to that point? You know what I mean?
The way that this person was talking about it, yes, they will. So they were, yeah, and they're obviously fighting their coach on not trying to go more right away and getting them to understand, like, all right, listen, we got to go, because this will be the first time they go, full hitting to the ground, all that in a scrimmage. And again, picking times in those scrimmages, when to go full, when to go thud, when to just tag off. They will have the time to work that out, because they'll potentially do 1 to 2 scrimmages in a week, especially as they get later into it. And again, it's situational. It's not full taking to the ground.
That's the interesting thing right now. Like, even my conversation yesterday is that they felt that the coaching staff, the football coaching staff, was actually more receptive now to use those types of wearables and GPS, and start sort of reverse engineering what happens in the game and where they have to be. So this time has been useful for them to kind of get on board with the numbers and seeing the metrics. So when maybe if we didn't have this time off, they would have just done what they've always done. So I think there's some bizarre positives coming out of this. Sorry to use the word positives, but yeah, you know what I mean. Some benefits. So I find it quite interesting that maybe there is some value in using this as an educational tool for the coaching staff more than anything. So any final comments before we sign off? Got a lot of games tomorrow to watch in the NFL as our little experiment to see where this goes. Rob?
Yeah, I have a question for Eric. No, seriously. You just said I was just thinking about this, and I'm just curious if you don't have an answer, don't worry about it. I don't think anybody does. But you just said how you started to treat athletes, 15 at a time in the training room, and you got to a point where it was comfortable, or I forget what you said, to do that. But obviously, there was a point in time where you were able to do that. And I'll just go back to my situation here in New York. So in March and April, this state, and especially New York City, and where I live in the region, was a disaster, right? Mm-hmm. And we've had marches, and we've had young people going out partying in the streets, and restaurants have opened. My point is we've had an influx of social gatherings for whatever reasons. And our state is under 1% now. And New York City and Long Island, where I live, is at 1%. And I don't know why, with all the socialization, everything going on, how we are dropping the way we're dropping. Sure, I know social distancing isn't happening in a lot of situations. A lot of people are wearing masks, and maybe that's the answer. But what happened in your scenario that you think made the difference so that, okay, now we're comfortable putting 15 people in a room? What changed to make you feel comfortable?
Well, I do feel more comfortable now than I did probably 2 months ago, just because our testing rates are so low, at least, especially within our group. We've done the past 2 weeks, 100% testing. We test on Mondays. And
my question is, what made the testing rate so low? That's my question.
I don't know. I think maybe our kids are doing well. Our state overall is doing a nice job with it, except for Boulder County, where CU is, where Colorado University is. They just had a monstrous spike. They've got 1,200 kids positive right now, and much more than that on lockdown. There's 1 in 29 students at CU are positive for COVID right now, and that's a school where our kids like to go party. And I told our coach, so you got to tell them, and I tell the kids, you can't go up there right now because we're so good. We're so close to playing a game. I don't know why our numbers are so low. Maybe we're better about wearing masks and keeping social distance. I think we go out and practice football like a regular football practice. It's not perfect like we want it. We'd like a little more social distancing on the sidelines and more masks on the players and coaches. but our numbers remain low. So I'm okay where we are. But we remain in the meeting rooms 6 feet apart with masks on. We try to limit the number of locker rooms still. We haven't moved up on that. I think like I said, a couple weeks ago, we opened the cold tubs, and last week we opened the water fountains to the guys in the locker room. Before that, we'd pull out our hydration pump. The guys we would help them fill their water bottles before strength conditioning. But I don't know why we're better. And I'm glad that the world or the country is trending better in certain areas. They said that we're going to play, and 3 teams on our schedule are in hotspots that, Fresno hasn't even been on a campus yet. And San Jose State's on their schedule, and they're struggling. And Hawaii, I think they're doing okay. If they come to play us, it won't matter. It's people like us going to Hawaii that have restrictions. New Mexico's in our league, and because of this big spike we had up in Boulder County, people coming from Colorado now have to quarantine for 14 days when they get to New Mexico. So I don't know who's going to have to travel and play football if they're going to open them up and let them play. I know I read also New Mexico-wise that the college basketball season is going to start a little earlier. I thought we weren't going to start till January, but there's a tournament in late November in Vegas that they're going to allow to play. But New Mexico basketball can't practice more or have more than 10 people in a room, including coaches. So they can't go 5-on-5 yet. But Rob, I don't know. I
was just curious. Like I said, we've had the beaches, we've had the restaurants, we've had everything, and our numbers are dropping. And I'm just,
I'm glad for it. I think whatever they're doing is working. I have not yet to go out to eat at dinner yet. I've had carry out and order in. When I said comfortable 15, what our number was, we took a 6-foot plank and moved around the room and separated taping tables, treatment tables, and that's how we do business. Our warm-up bikes, ellipticals, we knock one down in the middle, and we feel like they're wide enough apart, and where the kids can go in there and get a good warm-up and some cross-training or whatever we need them to do in the rehab area. But our guys aren't in as much. I don't know if they're getting tougher. Maybe they were spoiled a little bit, and you will see as the season goes on. Maybe they'll perform just like they did last year, without all the fancy recovery pumps and Mark Pros and Complexes that we were doing, that we made ourselves feel like they're doing better. Maybe, I don't know. Maybe it'll be a good year for us to get tougher.
Yeah. Well, thank you very much, everybody, for jumping on. I'm hoping it doesn't turn out like Rob says, and they just have way more injuries, but I don't know. I really don't know. Like every game is this sort of anxious thing to watch right now. So, I'm
not either, Derek.
Yeah. So we'll see. And I don't necessarily get the same feeling from watching a college game. So, maybe it's just people are moving faster out there. So thank you very much. Everybody continue to stay safe, and we'll probably try to jump on a little more frequently here and hear about Ryan's cross country turmoils. So take care, everyone. Have a good weekend. Thanks for jumping
weekend,
on.
Everyone.
See you guys. Thank you.
Good luck, Eric.
Thank you.
Bye, guys. Stay healthy.